I never thought I would be the kind of woman who dreaded hearing my own son's car pull into the driveway. For 63 years, I had lived my life with open arms and an open heart, welcoming anyone who walked through my door with warmth and whatever meal I could put together. But that afternoon in late September, when I heard the familiar rumble of Marcus's old pickup truck, my stomach tightened into a knot that had become all too familiar over the past 18 months. My name is Eleanor Price, and I spent 37 years as a high school English teacher in a small town in Tennessee called Maplewood. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Daniel passed away from a heart attack when our kids were still in elementary school. I taught myself how to fix leaky faucets, how to change the oil in my car, how to stretch a dollar so thin you could see through it. I worked double shifts during summers, tutored students on weekends, and somehow managed to put both my children through college without a single loan between them. My daughter Melissa lives in Seattle now with her husband and 3 beautiful children. She calls me every Sunday without fail, sends me photos of the grandkids, and flies me out twice a year to visit. She turned out just fine. And then there is Marcus. Marcus was always my sensitive one. He was the child who brought home injured birds and cried when we could not save them. He was the boy who wrote me poems for Mother's Day instead of buying cards from the store. He had his father's gentle eyes and his father's trusting heart, and I always worried that the world would take advantage of that softness. I never expected that the person who would take advantage of it would be his own wife. Marcus met Victoria at a corporate retreat 3 years ago. He was working as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in Nashville, and she was there representing some marketing company. According to Marcus, it was love at first sight. According to me, it was something else entirely, though I kept my mouth shut because that is what mothers are supposed to do. Victoria was beautiful, I will give her that. She had the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare, all sharp cheekbones and perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smiled at me with teeth so white they looked artificial, and she called me Mom from the very first dinner, even though something in her eyes told me she had no intention of ever treating me like family. They got married after only 8 months of dating. I bit my tongue at the rushed engagement. I smiled through the expensive wedding that Marcus could not afford. I welcomed Victoria into our family with genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong about her. I was not wrong. The first sign came about 2 months after the wedding, when they came to visit for Thanksgiving. I had spent 3 days preparing the meal, making all of Marcus's favorites from scratch, the way I had done every year since he was born. Turkey with my grandmother's stuffing recipe, sweet potato casserole, homemade cranberry sauce, 3 different pies. Victoria walked into my kitchen, looked around at all the food, and said, "Oh, you made all this yourself? That's so quaint." She said the word quaint the way someone might say pathetic. I let it go. Over the next year, I let a lot of things go. The way Victoria never thanked me for gifts I spent weeks choosing. The way she would cancel plans at the last minute, leaving me with a refrigerator full of food I had prepared for their visit. The way she would interrupt me mid-sentence to check her phone, or roll her eyes when I told stories about Marcus as a child. The way she had convinced Marcus to stop calling me every week, claiming she needed him to focus on their marriage. I let it all go because I loved my son, and I knew that if I said anything, I would lose him. But nothing prepared me for what happened 18 months ago, when I was supposed to move in with them. I had been diagnosed with early-stage macular degeneration, and my doctor had gently suggested that living alone might become difficult in the coming years. Marcus had immediately offered their guest room, and I had agreed, thinking it might be a chance to finally bond with Victoria and help out around the house. I sold my little house, the one I had lived in for 40 years, the one where I had raised my children and buried my husband's ashes under the rose bush in the backyard. I packed up my entire life into boxes and moved 3 hours away to live in my son's house. The first week was uncomfortable. The second week was tense. By the third week, I understood that I had made a terrible mistake. Victoria made it clear in 1,000 small ways that I was not welcome. She would accidentally use all the hot water before my morning shower. She would make dinner plans that conveniently did not include me. She would leave passive-aggressive notes around the house about respecting shared spaces and maintaining boundaries. She complained constantly to Marcus about how my presence was suffocating her, always making sure I could overhear from the next room. But the worst part, the part that still makes my chest ache when I think about it, was watching what she was doing to my son. Marcus had always been vibrant and full of laughter, but living with Victoria had dimmed that light. He walked around his own house like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. He apologized constantly, for everything, even things that were not his fault. He had stopped playing guitar, stopped reading, stopped doing any of the things that used to bring him joy. He just worked and worked and worked, trying to keep up with Victoria's expensive tastes, while she spent money like it was water and criticized him for not making enough. I tried to talk to him once, carefully, gently, the way you approach a wounded animal. I said, "Marcus, are you happy?" He looked at me with those gentle eyes, his father's eyes, and I saw something break behind them. Marcus said, "Mom, please, please don't." That was all he said. And I knew then that he was trapped, and that he knew he was trapped, and that there was nothing I could do about it without pushing him further away. So I tried to make myself useful. I cooked and cleaned and did laundry. I stayed out of Victoria's way. I made myself as small as possible, hoping that if I just gave it enough time, things would get better. They did not get better. 3 months into my stay, Victoria sat Marcus down and told him that having me there was destroying their marriage. She gave him an ultimatum. Either I moved out, or she would file for divorce. Marcus called me into the living room with tears streaming down his face and told me I had to leave. I will never forget the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who hated himself for what he was doing, but felt powerless to stop it. It was the look of a child who had been forced to choose between two impossible options and had chosen the one that would hurt the person who loved him most. I packed my bags that night. I used most of my savings, the money from selling my house, to put a deposit on a small apartment back in Maplewood. I hugged my son goodbye and told him I loved him, and I drove away with my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. For the next 15 months, I rebuilt my life. I found a part-time job at the local library, shelving books and helping with story time for the children. I reconnected with old friends from my teaching days. I adopted a tabby cat named Biscuit who liked to sleep on my chest and purr so loudly it sounded like a small engine. I learned to live alone again, to fill the silence with audiobooks and podcasts, since my eyes were getting worse. Marcus called occasionally, always when Victoria was not around. He would talk quickly, nervously, like he was doing something forbidden. He told me he missed me. He told me he was sorry. He told me things at home were complicated. He never told me he was happy, because we both knew that would have been a lie. And then, 6 months ago, everything changed. Victoria got pregnant. I found out through a text message from Marcus, which told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their lives. But despite everything, despite all the hurt and the rejection, I felt a surge of pure joy. A grandchild. My son was going to be a father. I called him immediately, crying happy tears, telling him how excited I was, how much I loved him, how I could not wait to meet the baby. Marcus said, "Mom, Victoria thinks, she thinks it would be better if you weren't too involved. With the pregnancy, I mean. She says the stress isn't good for the baby." The stress, as if my existence was a medical condition. I swallowed the sob that was building in my throat and said, "Of course, honey, whatever Victoria needs. Just, please send me pictures sometimes, of the ultrasounds, if you can." He sent exactly 2 pictures over the next 7 months. Both were blurry, clearly taken in a hurry, clearly hidden from his wife. I spent those months knitting. I made blankets and booties and little hats, all in soft yellows and greens since they had decided not to find out the gender. I poured all my love into every stitch, imagining wrapping my grandchild in warmth I had created with my own hands. When the baby was born, a beautiful girl they named Olivia, I found out from a social media post. Not a call, not a text, not even an email. A social media post that Victoria had tagged 17 other people in, but not me. I cried for 3 days straight, but I also sent a gift. A package with all the knitted items I had made, plus a savings bond, plus a letter telling baby Olivia how much her grandmother loved her and how I could not wait to meet her someday. I did not get a thank you. I did not get an acknowledgement at all. For all I knew, Victoria had thrown everything in the trash. Months passed. Olivia turned 1 month old, then 2, then 3. I saw pictures on social media, always posted by Victoria, always with captions about what a perfect family they were. I saw my son in those pictures, holding his daughter, and I noticed that the light in his eyes had changed. There was love there now, fierce protective love, the kind I remembered feeling when I first held him. And then, 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call. Marcus said, "Mom, can you come visit? Please?" I was in my car within the hour. When I arrived at their house, Victoria was nowhere to be seen. Marcus met me at the door with Olivia in his arms, and the moment I saw my granddaughter, everything else fell away. She was perfect. 10 little fingers, 10 little toes, a tuft of dark hair just like Marcus had when he was born. She looked at me with wide, curious eyes, and when I reached for her, she came to me willingly, settling into my arms like she had been waiting for me her whole short life. Marcus said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I'm so sorry." We sat on the porch while Olivia napped in my arms, and Marcus told me everything. How Victoria had become even more controlling after the baby was born. How she monitored his phone, his email, his every movement. How she had maxed out 3 credit cards without telling him and then blamed him for not making enough money. How she screamed at him in front of the baby, called him worthless, told him no one else would ever want him. Marcus lowered his voice and said, "She hit me last week, just once, but she hit me." And I looked at Olivia, and I thought, I can't let her grow up thinking this is normal. I can't let her grow up thinking this is what love looks like. I held my son's hand, and I cried, not just for him, but for all the time we had lost, all the hurt that could have been prevented if I had spoken up sooner. I asked, "What do you want to do?" Marcus said, "I want out. I've already talked to a lawyer. I have documentation of everything, her spending, her outbursts, everything. I have a chance at custody because I'm the primary caregiver. Victoria's been going back to work and leaving me with Olivia most of the time. I need help, Mom. I need somewhere to go while I figure this out." I said without hesitation, "You'll come home with me, both of you. For as long as you need." And that is exactly what happened. Marcus filed for divorce the next day. Victoria raged and threatened and threw things. But when she realized Marcus was serious, she did something unexpected. She left. Just packed a bag and went to stay with her sister, claiming she needed space to process everything. I think she assumed Marcus would come crawling back, begging her to return. She was wrong. For the past 2 weeks, Marcus and Olivia have been living with me in my small apartment. It has been cramped and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. I have gotten to know my granddaughter, learned that she likes being sung to and hates having her diaper changed, and makes the most adorable cooing sounds when she is happy. I have watched my son slowly start to become himself again, the gentle, joyful person he was before Victoria dimmed his light. But this brings me to what happened 3 days ago. The incident that prompted me to tell this whole story. Victoria had been texting Marcus constantly since she left, alternating between apologies and threats. He ignored most of them on his lawyer's advice. But then, out of nowhere, she announced she was coming to visit Olivia. Marcus said, "She has a right to see her daughter. I can't keep them apart completely. Not yet." Not until the custody arrangement is finalized. I understood, even though every protective instinct in my body was screaming. We agreed that Victoria could come for a few hours on Saturday, and that I would make myself scarce to avoid any confrontation. But then, Friday night, I got a text message. It was from Victoria. She had never texted me directly before, and seeing her name on my phone made my heart rate spike. The message said, "We're coming tomorrow at noon. Heat up the leftovers for us. I'm not eating that cat food you people have in your fridge." I stared at that message for a long time. Let me explain something about myself. I grew up in a household where respect for elders was not optional. My mother, God rest her soul, would have washed my mouth out with soap if I had ever spoken to an adult the way Victoria spoke to me. Throughout my career as a teacher, I dealt with plenty of difficult students and even more difficult parents, and I always handled it with grace and professionalism because that was what the job required. But I was not a teacher anymore. And I was not going to let this woman walk into my home and disrespect me. Not again. Not ever again. I did not respond to the text. Instead, I did something I had never done before in my entire relationship with Victoria. I made a plan. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and started cooking, not heating up leftovers. Cooking. I made my grandmother's famous pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the recipe that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. I made homemade rolls from scratch, the kind that take 3 hours to rise properly. I made a fresh garden salad with vegetables from my neighbor's plot, and a sweet tea so perfectly balanced between sweet and bitter that it could make angels weep. Marcus watched me bustle around the kitchen with growing confusion. He said, "Mom, what are you doing? Victoria just wanted leftovers." I replied calmly, "I know what Victoria wanted." But this is my home, and in my home, we treat guests properly, even guests who don't deserve it. He started to protest, but something in my expression made him stop. By 11:45, my small dining table was set with my best china, the set my mother had given me for my wedding, with fresh flowers in the center and cloth napkins folded into elegant shapes. The apartment smelled like heaven, all rich roasted meat and warm bread and home. Victoria arrived at exactly noon because she was the type of person who believed being punctual was a way of asserting dominance. She walked in without knocking, took one look at the table, and stopped dead in her tracks. Victoria demanded, "What is this?" I said pleasantly, "Lunch. Please sit down." She looked at Marcus, who was holding Olivia and carefully avoiding his wife's gaze. She looked back at the table. For a moment, I saw something flicker across her face, something that might have been confusion or suspicion. Victoria said slowly, like she was talking to a child. I said to heat up leftovers. I didn't ask for all this. I replied, I know. But I wanted to make you a proper meal, to welcome you. She laughed a sharp, unpleasant sound. Welcome me? Into this shoebox? I'm doing you a favor even being here. I pulled out her chair and gestured for her to sit. Please, Victoria, the food will get cold. Something about my calm demeanor seemed to unsettle her, but her hunger, or maybe her curiosity, won out. She sat down, eyeing the spread with barely concealed interest. Despite all her complaints about my cooking over the years, I noticed she had always cleaned her plate when she thought no one was watching. We ate in relative silence at first. Olivia was in her bouncer, making happy gurgling sounds at the mobile hanging above her. Marcus was tense, waiting for an explosion that had not come yet. Victoria ate methodically, her expression unreadable. And then Victoria said, This doesn't change anything, you know. I took a sip of my tea and asked, What doesn't change anything? Victoria waved her fork at the table. This whole act, the fancy dinner, the nice setting, you're trying to manipulate Marcus into feeling sorry for you. I said, I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I'm feeding you. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. Victoria rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You've been poisoning Marcus against me since the day we met. You couldn't stand that he found someone else to love. You're one of those mothers, the kind who can't let their sons grow up. I set down my fork very carefully. I could feel Marcus tensing beside me, ready to intervene, but I held up my hand slightly to stop him. I said, my voice steady, Victoria, may I tell you a story? She snorted. Oh, here we go. I replied, It's a short story, I promise. She made an impatient gesture with her hand. Fine, whatever. I took a breath. When Marcus was 7 years old, he found a bird in our backyard. It had a broken wing. He begged me to help him save it, and we spent 3 weeks nursing that bird back to health, feeding it with an eyedropper, keeping it warm, doing physical therapy on its wing, and when it was finally healed, we took it outside to release it. Victoria was picking at her food, clearly bored. I continued, Do you know what happened? The bird flew away, and Marcus cried. He cried so hard I thought his little heart would break. I asked him why he was sad since the bird was better now. Wasn't this what we wanted? And do you know what he said? Victoria said nothing. I went on. He said, I know the bird is supposed to fly away. That's what birds do. I just wish it could have stayed a little longer. And I told him something that day that I've believed my whole life. I leaned forward slightly. I said, I told him that loving something means wanting it to be free. That real love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, even when it breaks your heart. It's about putting someone else's happiness above your own. Victoria's jaw tightened. I continued quietly. I let my son go. I let him marry you even though I had concerns. I let him build a life with you. I let you push me out because I thought that's what he needed. And when you made him choose, I let him choose you. Because I thought you would make him happy. My voice trembled slightly, but I pushed through. I said, You didn't make him happy, Victoria. You made him small. You took my joyful, kind-hearted boy and you tried to crush him into something you could control. And I stayed quiet about it for years because I loved him more than I loved being right. Victoria's face had gone pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I replied, I know exactly what I'm talking about, because I watched it happen. Day after day, I watched you chip away at his confidence, his self-worth, his sense of who he was. I watched him apologize for existing. I watched him work himself to exhaustion, trying to please someone who would never be pleased. Victoria was stammering now, something I had never seen her do before. That's not, I continued. But here's the thing. I didn't make you lunch today because I want something from you. I didn't do it to prove a point or win some kind of competition. I did it because that's who I am. When someone sits at my table, I feed them. It doesn't matter if they've been kind to me or cruel. It doesn't matter if they've broken my heart. I feed them, because that's what love looks like. I gestured at the meal spread before us. I said, "This is what real love looks like, Victoria. It looks like showing up even when it's hard. It looks like giving, even when you get nothing in return. It looks like putting food on the table for someone who asked for heated up leftovers, because they're worth more than that, even if they don't know it yet." Victoria's lower lip trembled. You don't understand," I said gently. "Then help me understand, because I would like to. I have wanted to understand you since the day Marcus brought you home." There was a long silence. Olivia cooed happily in her bouncer. Marcus had stopped eating, watching us both with wide eyes. And then Victoria did something I never expected. She started to cry. Not pretty tears, not the elegant dabbing at the eyes I had seen her do before when she wanted sympathy. These were ugly, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, tears and snot running down her face as she completely fell apart at my dining room table. Marcus made a move toward her instinctively, but Victoria held up her hand to stop him. Victoria choked out, "Don't! Just don't!" I got up quietly and returned with a box of tissues, which I set beside her plate. Then I sat back down and waited. It took several minutes for Victoria to compose herself enough to speak. When she did, her voice was raw and broken in a way I had never heard before. Victoria said, "My mother never cooked for me. Not once. I grew up on frozen dinners and fast food and whatever I could scrounge from the kitchen when she remembered to buy groceries." I stayed silent, listening. Victoria continued. "She was always working or out with her boyfriends or just not there. And when she was there, she was criticizing me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. My grades weren't high enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't thin enough. She told me I had to be perfect to survive in this world, and she punished me every time I fell short." Victoria looked down at her plate, at the food I had spent hours preparing. Victoria whispered, "I used to dream about this." About sitting at a table like this, with homemade food and nice plates and someone who actually wanted to feed me. I used to watch those family movies where everyone sat together at dinner, and I would cry because I didn't understand what I had done wrong, why I couldn't have that. She took a shuddering breath. Victoria said, "And then I grew up and I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that I was strong and independent and I didn't need anyone. I built this armor around myself, this perfect exterior, because if I looked like I had it all together, maybe no one would see how broken I was inside." She finally met my eyes. Victoria continued, "When I met Marcus, he was so kind to me, so gentle. It scared me because I didn't know what to do with kindness. I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for him to show his true colors, to start criticizing me like my mother did, to leave like my father did. So I pushed first. I controlled first, because if I was in control, I couldn't be hurt." I said softly, "Oh, honey." Victoria looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "And you terrified me more than anything, because you loved Marcus so purely, so unconditionally, and I knew I could never compete with that. I knew I could never be good enough. So I pushed you away before you could reject me, before you could tell Marcus all the things my mother told me about myself." Marcus had tears streaming down his face now. "Vic, why didn't you tell me?" Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "Because admitting you're broken means admitting you need to be fixed. And I didn't think I could be fixed. I thought this was just who I was, who I would always be." I reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. She flinched at first, but did not pull away. I said, "Victoria, you are not broken. You are hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't be mended, but hurt can be healed. It takes time and it takes work, but it can be done." Victoria asked, sounding like a lost child. "How do you know?" I replied, "Because I've been hurt too. I lost my husband when my children were young. I raised them alone, worked myself to the bone, wondered every day if I was doing enough. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was failing them. But I got through it. And the getting through, the healing, that's what made me who I am today. I squeezed her hand gently. I said, "The woman who hurt you, your mother, she was wrong. There was nothing wrong with you then, and there's nothing wrong with you now. You just learned the wrong lessons about love. You learned that love is conditional, that you have to earn it by being perfect. But that's not true. Real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require perfection. It just requires showing up." Victoria broke down again, sobbing even harder than before. Victoria wept. "I've ruined everything. I've been so terrible. To Marcus, to you, to everyone. I can't take any of it back." I agreed. "No, you can't take it back. What's done is done. But you can choose what happens next. That's all any of us can do. Wake up each day and choose to do better than we did the day before." Marcus stood up from the table and walked around to where Victoria sat. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. Marcus said, "Vic, look at me." She looked at him through her tears. Marcus continued, "I'm not going to pretend everything is okay. It's not. We have a lot to work through, and I honestly don't know if we can. But I loved you once. Part of me still does. And if you're willing to get help, real help, if you're willing to do the work, then I'm willing to try." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "After everything I've done?" "You'd be willing to try?" Marcus replied, and his eyes flicked briefly to me. "That's what love is. It's showing up even when it's hard. It's giving even when you get nothing in return." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a mother's pride mixed with profound relief. My son had been listening all those years. He had heard me even when I thought my words were falling on deaf ears. Victoria turned to me, her face a mess of tears and runny mascara. "Mrs. Price, Eleanor, I don't even know what to say. I've been so horrible to you. I don't deserve your kindness." I replied, allowing myself a small smile. "That's probably true, but you're getting it anyway. That's just how I was raised." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "How are you so good? After everything?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. I said, "I'm not good. I'm human. I've felt anger and resentment and hurt, just like anyone else. But I learned a long time ago that holding on to those feelings only hurts the person holding them. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick." I stood up and began clearing the dishes, more out of habit than necessity. I continued. "My mother used to say that kindness is a choice we make every day. Some days it's easy, and some days it's the hardest thing in the world, but it's always a choice. And I choose kindness because the alternative is becoming someone I don't want to be." Victoria helped me clear the table, moving slowly, like she was in a daze. When we were standing together at the sink, she spoke again. Victoria said quietly, "I don't know how to be different. I've been this way for so long. I don't know how to be soft." I replied, "You start small. You start by saying thank you when someone does something nice. You start by apologizing when you make a mistake. You start by asking for help when you need it, even though it feels like weakness." I handed her a dish to dry. I said, "And you find someone to talk to, a professional, someone who can help you untangle all those knots your mother tied inside you. There's no shame in that. The strongest thing a person can do is admit they need help." Victoria nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. To talk to someone, I mean." I said, "Good. That's a good start." The rest of that afternoon was strange and tentative and unlike anything I could have imagined when I woke up that morning. We sat in my small living room, passing Olivia back and forth, talking about things we had never talked about before. Victoria told us more about her childhood, the neglect and criticism that had shaped her. Marcus talked about feeling trapped, about how small he had made himself trying to keep the peace. I talked about losing Daniel, about the loneliness of single motherhood, about all the times I had wanted to give up but kept going anyway. It was not a magical transformation. Real life does not work that way, but it was a beginning. A crack in the wall that had been built between us, letting in the first rays of light. When Victoria left that evening, she hugged me. It was awkward and stiff, but it was real. And as she walked to her car, she turned back and said something that made my heart skip. Victoria said, "Thank you for lunch, Eleanor. It was the best meal I've ever had." She meant more than the food, I knew that. And I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. That was 3 days ago. Since then, Victoria has started seeing a therapist. She goes twice a week, and she is already starting to understand patterns she never saw before. She and Marcus are doing couples counseling too, trying to learn how to communicate without hurting each other. They have not moved back in together yet, but they are talking about it, carefully, slowly, with the help of professionals. Victoria and I text now, real conversations instead of demands and cold responses. Yesterday, she sent me a picture of a bird she saw at the park with the caption, "Made me think of Marcus's story. Thank you for telling me that." I cried when I read it. Happy tears this time. I do not know how this story ends. Maybe Marcus and Victoria will find their way back to each other, stronger than before. Maybe they will not, and they will co-parent Olivia while building separate lives. Either way, I know that my son is going to be okay. He has found his voice again. He is remembering who he is. And Olivia, my sweet, perfect granddaughter. She will grow up knowing what real love looks like. She will have a grandmother who bakes cookies and tells stories and knits blankets that wrap her in warmth. She will know that she is enough, exactly as she is, without having to be perfect. That is the thing about love, the real kind. It does not keep score. It does not hold grudges. It does not require perfection or performance or anything except showing up, again and again, even when it is hard. I could have heated up the leftovers. I could have done the minimum, given Victoria exactly what she asked for, no more and no less. Part of me wanted to, honestly. The petty part, the hurt part, the part that remembered every cruel word and dismissive gesture. But that is not who I am. That is not who I want to be. I want to be the woman who sets a beautiful table even for people who do not deserve it. I want to be the woman who feeds the hungry, whether their hunger is for food or for love or for acceptance. I want to be the woman who chooses kindness every day, even when it would be so much easier to choose bitterness. Because here is what I have learned in 63 years of living. The world has enough cruelty. It has enough people who give exactly what they get, who match hurt with hurt and anger with anger. What the world needs more of is grace. Unearned, undeserved, freely given grace. Victoria texted me this morning. She asked if she could come over next weekend and learn how to make my grandmother's pot roast. I said yes, because that is what love looks like. It looks like standing in a kitchen with someone who once tried to push you out of your own son's life, teaching them a recipe that has been passed down through generations of women who understood that food is love made visible. It looks like second chances and third chances and as many chances as it takes. It looks like heated up leftovers that somehow turned into a feast. My daughter-in-law texted me those words expecting me to be small, to be diminished, to be put in my place. She expected me to heat up whatever was in the fridge and stay out of her way. What she got instead was a table set with love, a meal prepared with care, and a mother-in-law who refused to be anything less than exactly who she was. And what she found, I think, was something she had been hungry for her whole life. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is respond to cruelty with kindness. Not because it is easy, but because it is right. Not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to be the kind of person who gives it. That is what I did next. And yes, it left her speechless. But more importantly, it opened a door. And what walked through that door was something neither of us expected. Hope. There are still hard days ahead, I know. Healing is not linear, and the patterns Victoria learned in childhood will not disappear overnight. There will be setbacks and arguments and moments when it seems like everything is falling apart again. But there will also be moments like last night, when Victoria called me just to talk, not about anything important, just about her day and Olivia's new tooth coming in, and a funny thing she saw on television. Normal things, family things. And there will be moments like this morning, when Marcus stopped by before work just to give me a hug and tell me he loved me. Something he had not done in years. And there will be moments like right now, as I sit in my apartment with Biscuit purring on my lap, thinking about all the ways life can surprise you if you stay open to it. I am 63 years old. My eyes are going, slowly but surely. I live in a small apartment with a cat and too many books and photographs of people I love covering every available surface. I do not have much, by the world's standards, but I have a son who is finding his way back to himself. I have a granddaughter who lights up when she sees me. I have a daughter in Seattle who calls every Sunday without fail. I have friends who show up and a community that cares, and a life that, despite everything, still has more joy in it than sorrow. And I have a daughter-in-law who is learning, day by day, that love does not have to be earned. That kindness does not come with conditions. That family is not about perfection, it is about showing up. Victoria asked me recently why I had not given up on her. After everything she put me through, after the way she treated me, why did I still extend my hand? I told her about my mother, who passed away when I was 42. About how, on her deathbed, she grabbed my hand and said, "Eleanor, promise me something. Promise me you'll never run out of grace for the people who need it most. The ones who hurt you, the ones who push you away. They're the ones who need love the most desperately. Don't give up on them. Ever." I made that promise. And I have tried to keep it, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when every instinct told me to protect myself by closing off my heart. Victoria cried when I told her that story. And then she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Victoria said, "I wish I had known your mother." But I'm so grateful I know you. That is when I knew that everything, all of it, the pain and the rejection and the loneliness, had been worth it. Because it led to this moment, this healing, this hope. Victoria visits twice a week now. She brings Olivia, and we spend afternoons together, the three of us doing ordinary things. We bake cookies. We go for walks in the park. We sit on my porch and watch the sunset while Olivia babbles happily in her stroller. Sometimes Marcus joins us. He has started playing guitar again. Last Tuesday, he sat on my porch and played a song he had written for Olivia, a simple lullaby about a little girl who was loved by everyone who knew her. Victoria cried when she heard it. Good tears. The divorce proceedings are moving forward, but they are doing it gently, with respect for each other and for their daughter. The lawyers are surprised at how amicable things have become. They have seen too many divorces turn into wars. They do not know what to make of two people who are choosing to end their marriage while also choosing to heal their friendship. I told Marcus that I was proud of him. He asked me why, since his marriage had failed. I said, "Your marriage didn't fail, sweetheart. It taught you who you are and who you want to become, and now you're becoming that person. That's not failure, that's growth." He thought about that for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, do you think you and Dad would have made it if he had lived?" I considered the question carefully. Daniel has been gone for 31 years now, and there are days when I can barely remember his face without looking at a photograph. But I remember how he made me feel. Safe, cherished, seen. I replied, "I think we would have had hard times, like any couple." I think we would have argued and disappointed each other and wondered if we made the right choice. But yes, I think we would have made it. Because we both understood that marriage isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about choosing to love an imperfect person, day after day, through all the hard times and the boring times, and the times when you want to give up. Marcus nodded slowly. He said, I didn't choose that with Victoria. I chose to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to make myself smaller and smaller until there was barely anything left of me. I said, that wasn't love, that was survival, and you can't build a life on survival alone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to do better next time, if there is a next time. I want to be the kind of husband Dad was. I took his hand. I said, you will be. You're learning. That's all any of us can do. The next Saturday came faster than I expected. I woke at 5 a.m, too nervous to sleep, and started preparing the kitchen. I scrubbed surfaces that were already clean. I arranged and rearranged the flowers on the table. I checked the roast 4 times before it was even close to being done. Victoria arrived first, looking almost as nervous as I felt. She was wearing a simple dress instead of her usual designer clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger somehow, softer. Victoria said, I got here early. I hope that's okay. I wanted to help you set up. I handed her an apron. I said, there's potatoes that need peeling. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes when you do not need words to communicate. Every few minutes, Victoria would glance at the clock, and I knew she was counting down the time until her mother arrived. Victoria finally said, I don't know if I can do this. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. I asked, what are you afraid of? She thought about it. Victoria said, I'm afraid she won't change. I'm afraid she'll be exactly who she's always been, and all of this hope will have been for nothing. But I'm also afraid she will change, and then I'll have to forgive her for everything she did, and I don't know if I can do that. I wiped my hands on my apron and turned to face her fully. I said, forgiveness isn't about saying what someone did was okay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying that hurt around. You can forgive your mother and still set boundaries. You can forgive her and still choose to protect yourself from being hurt again. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means letting go of the poison you've been drinking and hoping she would get sick from. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She said, I've been drinking that poison for a long time. I replied, I know, and you can stop whenever you're ready. Not for her, for you. There was a knock at the door. We both froze. I said, Are you ready? Victoria took a deep breath. She said, No, but I'm going to answer the door anyway. She walked to the door and opened it, and there stood Catherine Mills. I do not know what I expected. Some monster, perhaps. Some cold and terrible woman whose cruelty was written on her face. Instead, I saw a woman who looked remarkably like Victoria, the same bone structure, the same blonde hair, though Catherine's was streaked with gray. The same nervous energy, the same way of holding herself like she was bracing for a blow. And in her eyes, I saw something I recognized. Fear. Desperate, hopeful, terrified fear. Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper, Victoria, thank you for letting me come. Victoria stood there for a long moment, her hand still on the door. Then she stepped aside. Victoria said, Come in. Eleanor made pot roast. She's going to teach us how. Catherine stepped inside, and I saw her take in the small apartment, the table set with my mother's china, the flowers, the smells wafting from the kitchen. Her eyes filled with tears. Catherine said, It smells like what I imagined home would smell like, when I was little. Before everything went wrong. I stepped forward and extended my hand. I said, Catherine, I'm Eleanor. Welcome to my home. She took my hand and her grip was trembling. Catherine said, I don't know why you're being so kind to me, after everything. I said, Because you're here, because you showed up. That's where everything starts. Now come on, there's rolls to be made and I could use some extra hands. The next 3 hours were strange and awkward and beautiful. We cooked together, the three of us, bumping into each other in my small kitchen, making mistakes and fixing them, learning the recipe that had been passed down through generations of women in my family. Catherine burned the first batch of rolls. She looked at them with tears streaming down her face, apologizing over and over, convinced that she had ruined everything. I threw them away and started a new batch, showing her how to tell when the dough had risen enough, how to shape them properly, how to watch for that golden brown color that means they are ready. Victoria struggled with the gravy, adding too much flour at first and then overcorrecting with too much liquid. I stood beside her and guided her through it, showing her how to fix it, how to season it properly, how to taste as you go. We talked while we worked, small talk at first, the weather, the news, safe subjects, but gradually the conversation deepened. Catherine talked about her own mother, who had been even more critical and distant than she had been with Victoria. She talked about growing up believing she was worthless, about marrying young to escape her home, about repeating all the same patterns because she did not know any other way. Catherine said, "I told myself I was doing better than my mother did, because at least I stayed. At least I was physically present, but I wasn't really there, was I? I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I couldn't see how much I was hurting my daughter." Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Victoria said, "I used to think you hated me. I used to lie awake at night trying to figure out what I had done wrong, why you looked at me with such disappointment." Catherine's face crumpled. Catherine said, "I never hated you. I was terrified of you. You were so bright and beautiful and full of potential, and I was so afraid that I would ruin you the way my mother ruined me. So I tried to make you tough. To prepare you for a world that I thought was cruel and unforgiving. I didn't realize that I was the cruelest thing in your world." She reached out hesitantly and touched Victoria's cheek. Catherine said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know those words aren't enough. I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm sorry, Victoria. From the bottom of my heart." Victoria stood there for a long moment. I could see her wrestling with decades of hurt, decades of built-up resentment and pain. Then she did something that surprised all of us. She stepped forward and hugged her mother. It was awkward at first, stiff and uncertain, two people who had forgotten how to touch each other with love. But then Catherine's arms came up and wrapped around her daughter, and Victoria's shoulders began to shake with sobs, and they stood there in my kitchen holding each other while the pot roast simmered and the rolls rose, and I quietly excused myself to give them privacy. I sat on my porch with Biscuit in my lap, watching the afternoon light slant through the trees, listening to the muffled sounds of crying and talking coming from inside. I thought about my own mother, about all the things I never got to say to her before she died. I thought about Daniel, about the conversations we would never have, the grandchildren he would never meet. And I thought about how strange and wonderful life can be, how pain can lead to healing if you let it, how walls can come down if someone is brave enough to make the first crack. About an hour later, Victoria came out to find me. Victoria said, "The roast is ready. Will you come carve it?" I looked at her face, at the tear tracks on her cheeks, at the tentative hope in her eyes. I asked, "How are you doing?" She considered the question. Victoria said, "I don't know yet, but I think maybe this is what healing feels like. Messy and confusing and kind of terrifying, but also like something is shifting, like there might be room for something new to grow." I stood up and took her hand. I said, "That's exactly what healing feels like. You're doing beautifully." We went back inside, and I carved the roast while Victoria and Catherine set the table. 3 women, 3 generations of hurt, sitting down together to share a meal. I said grace before we ate. I thanked God for the food, for the company, for the chance to start again. I asked for wisdom and patience and grace for all of us. And I asked for the strength to keep choosing love, even when it was hard. When I opened my eyes, both Victoria and Catherine were crying. Catherine said, "No one has ever said grace for me before, not that I can remember." I replied, "Then we'll do it every time. Grace isn't just for food, it's for everything. It's for people who need a second chance. It's for moments like this one." We ate. The pot roast was good. Maybe not my best, but good enough. The rolls that Catherine had made on her second attempt were surprisingly perfect. The conversation flowed more easily now, lubricated by food and tears and the strange intimacy of cooking together. At some point, Olivia woke up from her nap in the bedroom. Victoria went to get her and brought her to the table. I watched Catherine's face when she saw her granddaughter for the first time. Catherine's voice broke as she said, "She looks just like Victoria did as a baby." Victoria handed Olivia to her mother. Catherine held her so carefully, so tenderly, like she was afraid she might break her. Catherine whispered, "Hello, beautiful girl. I'm your grandmother. I'm sorry I'm meeting you so late. But I promise I'm going to do better." Olivia looked up at Catherine with those wide, curious eyes and grabbed her nose. We all laughed. And in that moment, in that laughter, something shifted. Something healed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to go on. Enough to hope. Love is patient and love is kind. It does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. It is not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I have tried to love that way. Not perfectly, because I am human and I fail. But consistently, because that is the only way love means anything. Not as a grand gesture once in a while, but as a daily choice, over and over, even when no one is watching. Heat up the leftovers? No. Set a feast instead. Not because anyone deserves it, but because that is who you want to be. That is who you are capable of being. That is the person waiting inside you, the one who chooses love every single day. I believe in that person. I believe in you. And I believe with my whole imperfect heart that kindness wins in the end. Maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, maybe not in the ways we expect, but it wins. I know this because I lived it. Because 3 days ago, I set a table for a woman who had spent years trying to push me out of my own son's life, and because of that choice, everything changed. My name is Eleanor Price. I am a 63-year-old former English teacher with failing eyesight and a stubborn belief in the power of a home-cooked meal. And this is my story. The story of how a text message about leftovers became the beginning of a healing I never thought possible. The story of how love, the real kind, always finds a way. There is something I have not told you yet, something that happened just yesterday that made me realize this story needed to be shared. I was sitting in my living room, folding laundry and half watching an old movie on television, when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, which usually means someone trying to sell me something I do not need. But something made me answer anyway. A woman's voice came through, hesitant and uncertain. She said, "Is this Eleanor Price?" I said, "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" There was a long pause. She said, "My name is Catherine. Catherine Mills. I'm Victoria's mother." I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, I could not speak. This was the woman who had caused so much damage, who had planted all those seeds of self-doubt and fear in Victoria that had grown into walls between her and everyone who tried to love her. Catherine continued, her voice shaking. "Victoria gave me your number. She said I should call you. She said you might understand." I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. I asked, "Understand what?" Catherine said, "How to change. How to be different." She told me what you did for her, the lunch you made, what you said to her. She told me everything. Her voice broke. Catherine continued, "I've made so many mistakes. I was so young when I had Victoria, and I was so angry at the world, and I took it out on her. I told myself I was making her strong, preparing her for life, but I was just hurting her, the same way my mother hurt me, and her mother before that. I listened in silence, my heart pounding. Catherine said, Victoria didn't speak to me for almost 2 years, and then last week she called me, out of nowhere. She told me about her marriage, about the baby, about you. And she said something that I can't stop thinking about. I asked, What did she say? Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. She said that you showed her what a mother's love was supposed to look like. And she asked me if I wanted to try again, to be that kind of mother, even though it's late, even though I missed so much. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Catherine continued, I don't know how to do that. I've been hard my whole life. I don't know how to be soft. But Victoria said you might be able to help me, that you helped her, that you didn't give up on her even when she gave you every reason to. She was crying now. I could hear it. Catherine said, I know I don't deserve your help. After everything my daughter did to you, because of me, because of how I raised her. But I'm asking anyway, because I don't want to die having never really loved my own child. And I don't know how to start. I sat there for a long moment, phone pressed to my ear, thinking about the strange and winding paths that bring people into our lives. Thinking about my mother's words about grace, about never running out of it for the people who need it most. I said, Catherine, do you have a pen and paper? She said, Yes, I do. I said, I want you to write down an address. It's a small apartment in Maplewood, Tennessee. Nothing fancy. But next Saturday, I'd like you to come for lunch. There was silence on the other end of the line. I continued, I'm going to make my grandmother's pot roast. It's a recipe that's been in my family for 4 generations. Victoria is learning to make it too. Maybe you could learn together. Catherine was sobbing now, ugly broken sounds that reminded me so much of Victoria at my dining room table. She managed to say, Why? Why would you do that for me? I replied. Because that's who I am. When someone sits at my table, I feed them. It doesn't matter where they've been or what they've done. What matters is where they're going. I paused. I said, You asked how to start being different. This is how you start. You show up. You sit at a table with the people you've hurt and you let them feed you. You accept grace even when you don't deserve it. And then, someday, when you're ready, you pass it on to someone else. Catherine whispered, I'll be there. Thank you. Thank you so much. I said, Don't thank me yet. My pot roast is pretty good, but it's not magic. The real work, the hard work, that's going to be up to you. All I can do is set the table. She said, I understand. I'll do the work. I promise. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, watching the afternoon light slant through my windows and thinking about how strange and beautiful life can be. When I was young, I thought I knew what my story would be. I would teach and marry and raise my children and grow old with Daniel by my side. That story ended when I was 32 years old, and I had to write a new one. One I never expected or wanted, but one that turned out to have its own kind of beauty. And now, at 63, I am finding that the story still is not finished. There are still new chapters being written, new characters walking through my door, new chances to choose grace over bitterness. Next Saturday, there will be 3 generations of women in my kitchen. A grandmother, a mother, and a daughter, all of them wounded in different ways, all of them trying to heal. Victoria will probably burn the rolls because she always forgets to watch the oven. Catherine will probably say something awkward because she does not know how to be soft yet. I will probably cry into the gravy because that is what I do when I am overwhelmed with emotion. But we will sit at the table together. We will eat the food I prepared with my own hands. And maybe, just maybe, We will start to become something that none of us ever thought we could be. A family. I called Marcus last night to tell him about his mother-in-law coming. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, you know you don't have to do this, right? Nobody would blame you for saying no." I replied, "I know." He asked, "Then why?" I thought about how to explain it. I said, "Because hurt people hurt people. It's a chain that goes back generations, mothers passing pain down to daughters like a twisted inheritance. And the only way to break that chain is for someone to choose differently. Someone has to be the one who absorbs the hurt instead of passing it on. Someone has to be the one who offers grace instead of revenge." I paused. I continued. "I decided a long time ago that I wanted to be that someone. Not because I'm special, but because I've been on the receiving end of grace, and I know how powerful it is. My mother gave it to me. My friends gave it to me when Daniel died and I could barely get out of bed. Strangers have given it to me when I least expected it. I said, it would be wrong of me to hoard all that grace for myself. It was given to me so I could give it away." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I love you, Mom." I replied, "I love you too, sweetheart. Now get some sleep." "You've got a baby to take care of in the morning." After we hung up, I looked around my small apartment, at the photos on every surface, at Biscuit curled up on his favorite chair, at the life I had built from the ruins of the one I expected to have. And I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, not the peace of a life without problems, but the peace of knowing who you are and what you stand for. The peace of knowing that no matter what happens, you will meet it with an open heart. That is the real lesson of my story, I think. Not that kindness always works, or that grace always heals, or that happy endings are guaranteed. Real life is messier than that. Sometimes you set a beautiful table and the guest still walks away unchanged. Sometimes you offer forgiveness and it is thrown back in your face. Sometimes you do everything right and it still is not enough, but you do it anyway. Not for results, but for principle. Not because it will change them, but because it reflects who you want to be. You choose grace because the alternative is letting hurt harden you into someone you do not recognize. My daughter-in-law texted me, "Heat up the leftovers for us." She expected submission. She expected me to shrink, to comply, to be small. Instead, I set a feast. Not to prove a point, not to win, but because that is what love does. It shows up with more than what is asked. It gives more than what is deserved. It sets a table and invites even the people who have hurt you to sit down and eat. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that invitation changes everything. The phone rang again 2 hours later, just as I was about to turn off the lights. It was Melissa, my daughter, calling from Seattle. She does not usually call this late, so I knew something was on her mind. Melissa said, "Mom, Marcus just called me. He told me everything. About Victoria, about her mother calling you, about next Saturday." I sighed and settled back onto the couch. I figured he would. He tells you everything. Melissa said, "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, Victoria treated you terribly for years. And now you're going to teach her mother how to cook? The woman who raised her to be that way?" I replied. "That's exactly why I'm doing it, sweetheart." Melissa was quiet for a moment. She said, "I don't understand. I really don't. If someone treated me the way Victoria treated you, I would never speak to them again." And I definitely wouldn't invite their mother over for cooking lessons. I thought about how to explain it to her. Melissa has always been more like Daniel, practical and logical, seeing the world in terms of cause and effect, action, and consequence. She does not quite understand the language of grace the way Marcus does. I said, "Let me ask you something. When Michael was 3 years old and he went through that phase where he hit other kids at daycare, what did you do?" Melissa sounded confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" I replied, "Just answer the question." She sighed. "We talked to him. We taught him better. We gave him consequences, but also lots of love. Eventually, he grew out of it." I said, "And if I had told you to give up on him, to stop loving him because he was hurting other children, what would you have said?" Melissa said, "That's ridiculous. He was a child. Children don't know any better. They learn behavior from the adults around them." I replied, "Exactly. They learn behavior from the adults around them." There was a long pause. Melissa said slowly, "You're saying Victoria was taught to be that way, like Michael hitting kids at daycare." I said, "I'm saying that hurt is learned, and if it can be learned, it can be unlearned, but only if someone is willing to teach something different." Melissa sighed. "But Mom, Michael was 3. Victoria is a grown woman." I replied, "The size of the child doesn't matter. What matters is the willingness to learn. Victoria is willing. Against all odds, despite everything, she's willing to try. And her mother is too. That's more than most people ever manage." Melissa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what I remember most about growing up?" I asked, "What's that?" She said, "The smell of your kitchen. No matter what was happening, no matter how hard things got, your kitchen always smelled like something good was cooking. Even after Dad died, even when we had barely enough money for groceries, you always made it smell like home." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Melissa continued, "I didn't realize until I was much older what that meant, how much effort it took. How you must have been exhausted and grieving and scared, but you still got up every morning and made breakfast. You still baked cookies for our birthdays. You still made Thanksgiving dinner even when it was just the 3 of us at a table meant for 8. She took a shaky breath. Melissa said, "That's what you're doing for Victoria, isn't it? And her mother. You're giving them what you gave us. The smell of a kitchen that means someone loves you." I could not speak for a moment. I finally managed to say, "I'm just making pot roast, sweetheart." Melissa laughed through what sounded like tears. "Mom, you've never just made anything in your life. Every meal you've ever cooked has been an act of love. I wish I had realized that sooner. I wish I had thanked you more." I said, "You're thanking me now. That's enough." She said, "I want to come home for Christmas this year. All of us. Me and James and the kids. I want to be at your table." "I want my children to smell your kitchen and know what it means." I said, "I would love that more than anything." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room for a long time, thinking about kitchens and love and the ways we pass things down to our children without even realizing it. My mother taught me to cook. Not just the mechanics of it, the measuring and the timing and the temperatures, but the spirit of it. She taught me that feeding people is an act of love, that a meal shared is a bond formed, that the table is a sacred space where people come as strangers and leave as family. I taught that to my children, or tried to. Melissa learned the logistics, but maybe not the heart of it until now. Marcus learned the heart of it, but never quite mastered the logistics. That is okay. We all learn different things at different times. And now I am going to try to teach it to Victoria and Catherine. 2 women who never learned what a mother's love was supposed to look like. 2 women who are hungry for something they cannot even name. I am not naive. I know this might not work. Catherine might come to lunch on Saturday and be exactly who Victoria described, cold and critical and unable to change. Victoria might relapse into old patterns when things get hard. The healing that has started might not continue, but I have to try. because that is who I am. That is who my mother raised me to be. And that is who I choose to be every single day, even when it is hard. There is a photograph on my mantelpiece that I look at every morning. It is my mother in her kitchen, probably around the age I am now, standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand. She is smiling at whoever is taking the picture, and her apron is dusted with flour, and behind her you can see pots steaming and dishes stacked and all the evidence of a meal in progress. That is what love looks like, captured in a single image. And that is what I want to pass on. To my children, to my grandchildren, to my daughter-in-law, to anyone who sits at my table and lets me feed them. That sense of being held, of being wanted, of being home. The world tells us that revenge is sweet, that justice means giving people what they deserve, that protecting ourselves requires keeping others out. And maybe that is true, some of the time, for some people. But my mother taught me a different way. She taught me that the sweetest thing in life is seeing someone change, watching walls come down, being present for the moment when hurt finally starts to heal. She taught me that justice without mercy is just cruelty by another name. She taught me that protecting yourself does not have to mean closing your heart. I have been wounded in my life. I have been let down and pushed out and treated badly by people who should have known better. I have every right to be bitter, to keep score, to give people exactly what they deserve and nothing more. But I choose differently. Every day, I choose differently. Not because I am a saint, not because I have some supernatural capacity for forgiveness, but because I have seen what the alternative looks like, and I do not want that for myself. I have seen people who held on to their anger until it ate them alive. I have seen families torn apart by grudges that nobody could even remember starting. I have seen the toll that bitterness takes on the person who carries it, and I have decided that I would rather set a table than build a wall. I would rather risk being hurt again than guarantee that I will never feel anything at all. I would rather spend my remaining years offering grace than hoarding grudges. That is my choice. Made fresh every morning, made again every time someone gives me a reason to choose differently. Victoria's text message gave me a reason to choose differently. Heat up the leftovers for us. Such a small cruelty, such an easy opportunity to respond in kind, to be petty, to give her exactly what she asked for and nothing more. I chose differently. And look what happened. That is the power we all have. The power to choose. Every moment of every day, we are choosing who we want to be. We are choosing whether to respond to hurt or with grace. We are choosing whether to build walls or set tables. We are choosing whether to pass our pain down to the next generation, or to absorb it, to end the cycle, to start something new. It is not easy. I will never pretend it is easy. Some days the choice feels impossible. Some days I want to scream at the unfairness of it all, to demand that people treat me the way I treat them, to give up on this whole exhausting project of loving people who do not seem to deserve it. But then I think about my mother. I think about her hands, rough from years of hard work, gentle when they touched my face. I think about her voice, tired but never harsh, singing hymns while she washed dishes. I think about her eyes, the way they crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the way they could see the good in anyone, even people who could not see it in themselves. I want to be like her. I am still learning to be like her, even at 63 years old. And if I can learn, then Victoria can learn. And Catherine can learn. And anyone can learn. That is what gives me hope. Not some naive belief that everything will turn out perfectly, but the knowledge that change is possible, that people are capable of growth at any age, in any circumstance, if they are willing to do the work. Victoria is willing. I have seen it in her eyes, heard it in her voice, felt it in the way she hugged me goodbye that Saturday afternoon. She is terrified and uncertain and not at all confident that she can become a different person, but she is willing to try. That willingness is everything. It is the seed from which transformation grows. It is the crack in the wall through which light enters. And I am honored to be part of it, to be the one who sets the table, to be the one who teaches the recipes, to be the one who shows what love can look like when it is patient and kind and does not keep score. I am going to bed now. Tomorrow I have library story time with the children, and then I am going to call Melissa and tell her about everything that has happened. She will probably laugh and cry and tell me I am the most stubborn woman she knows, and she will be right. But before I go, I want to say one more thing. To whoever is reading this, wherever you are, whatever your story holds, you have the power to break cycles. You have the power to choose differently than the people who came before you. You have the power to set a table instead of building a wall, to offer grace instead of keeping score, to be the person who absorbs hurt instead of passing it on. It will not be easy. It will not always work. Some people will take your kindness and throw it in your face. Some people will eat at your table and then talk about you behind your back. Some people will never change, no matter how much grace you offer. But some will. And even if they do not, you will. Every act of grace changes the person who gives it. Every time you choose love over bitterness, you become more yourself, more whole, more free. That is the secret my mother taught me. That is what I tried to teach Marcus. That is what I am now trying to teach Victoria, and maybe someday Catherine too. Love is not a feeling, it is a choice, and you can make that choice today, right now, with whoever is sitting across your table, literal or metaphorical. You can choose to set a feast instead of heating up the leftovers. You can choose to be the person who changes everything. I believe in you. I believe in the power of grace to transform even the most broken situations. I believe in second chances and third chances and chances beyond counting. And I believe with my whole heart that the world needs more people who believe in those things too. So heat up the leftovers if you want. Do the minimum. Give people exactly what they deserve, no more and no less. Or set a table. Prepare a feast. Offer more grace than anyone has a right to expect. And see what happens next. My name is Eleanor Price. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that love is not a feeling but a choice you make every single day. This is my story. But more importantly, it is an invitation. What will you choose? There is one more thing I want to share before I end this story. Something that happened just this morning that feels like the perfect ending, even though I know it is really just another beginning. I woke up early, as I always do these days. The light was just starting to come through my bedroom window, soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is painted in honey. Biscuit was curled up at my feet, purring contentedly. I got up and made myself a cup of tea, moving quietly so as not to wake anyone. Marcus and Olivia were still asleep in the guest room. They have been staying with me for 3 weeks now, and I have gotten used to the sounds of a baby in my house again. The coos and cries, the midnight feedings, the way she laughs when Marcus makes silly faces at her. I took my tea out to the porch and sat in my rocking chair, watching the sun come up over the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, just birdsong and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I thought about my mother again, about how she used to do the same thing every morning before anyone else was awake. She called it her conversation with God, and then I heard footsteps behind me. Victoria was standing in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. She has been coming over most mornings now, using the spare key I gave her, joining us for breakfast before she heads to work. Victoria said softly, "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the chair beside me. She sat down and pulled her knees up to her chest, looking out at the sunrise. We sat in silence for a long time. It was the kind of silence that used to be awkward between us, filled with all the things we were not saying. But now it was comfortable. Easy. like the silence between two people who have said the hard things and made it to the other side. Finally, Victoria spoke. Victoria said, "I talked to my mother again last night, on the phone." I waited. Victoria continued. "She's in therapy now, twice a week. She says it's hard. She keeps having to face things she spent her whole life running from, but she's doing it." I asked, "How does that make you feel?" Victoria thought about it. She said, "Complicated. Part of me is proud of her. Part of me is angry that she couldn't do this sooner, that it took losing me to make her change. Part of me is scared that she'll give up, that this is all temporary, that she'll go back to being who she was." She paused. Victoria said, "But mostly I feel hope. Is that strange? After everything?" I reached over and took her hand. I said, "Hope is never strange. Hope is the bravest thing there is." Victoria squeezed my hand. She said, "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." I waited. Victoria said, "Thank you for everything, for the pot roast, and the grace, and the second chance, but mostly for showing me what a mother's love is supposed to look like. I didn't have that growing up. I didn't know it existed. And then I met you, and you terrified me because you were everything I never had and everything I didn't think I deserved." Her voice broke. Victoria continued, "But you didn't give up on me, even when I was terrible to you. Even when I pushed you away and said awful things and tried to take your son from you, you just kept loving, kept showing up." Kept setting the table. She was crying now, soft tears running down her cheeks. Victoria said, "I want to be like you. When Olivia grows up, I want her to know the kind of love you showed me. I want to break the cycle. I want to be different." I felt my own eyes filling with tears. I said, "You already are different. You're here, aren't you? Sitting on my porch at sunrise, talking about love and hope and change. The Victoria I met 3 years ago wouldn't have done that. She was too scared, but you're not scared anymore. You're brave." Victoria let out a shaky laugh. She said, "I'm terrified, actually, every day, but I do it anyway." I replied, "That's what bravery is. Doing the thing even though you're scared, and you're doing it. Every single day." We sat together and watched the sunrise. Two women who had started as enemies and somehow become family. Not the family we were born into, but the family we chose. The family we built. One awkward conversation and one shared meal at a time. Marcus came out a few minutes later, carrying Olivia in one arm and a cup of coffee in the other. He looked at us sitting there together, at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, at the peace that had settled over his family. Marcus said, "Am I interrupting something?" I smiled. I said, "Not at all. We were just talking about love." He sat down on the porch steps, settling Olivia in his lap. She immediately reached for a flower in the pot beside him. Marcus said, "You know, Mom, when I was a kid, I used to think you were too nice. I thought the world would take advantage of you. I thought being kind was the same as being weak." I asked, "And now?" He looked at Victoria, then at Olivia, then back at me. Marcus said, "Now I know that kindness is the strongest thing there is. It's easy to be cruel. Anyone can do that. But to keep choosing love, day after day, even when people hurt you, even when the world tells you to protect yourself by shutting down, that takes more strength than anything I've ever seen." He smiled at me. Marcus said, "I want to be like you, Mom. I want Olivia to grow up in a house where kindness is the rule, not the exception. I want her to know that love doesn't keep score, that grace is always available, that second chances are real." Victoria nodded. Victoria said, "We both do. That's what we want for our daughter, even if we can't be together." We want her to grow up in the kind of love Eleanor showed us. I looked at these two people, my son and the woman he had married, who were ending their marriage but beginning something new. A friendship, a partnership, a shared commitment to raising their daughter differently than they had been raised. And I felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly knocked the breath out of me. I said, "She will. I promise you both she will, because you're going to teach her. Every day, with every choice, you're going to show her what love looks like." Olivia laughed and grabbed Marcus's nose, the same way she had grabbed Catherine's nose at that first lunch. We all laughed with her, and in that moment, everything felt possible. That was this morning, just a few hours ago. And now here I am, writing this all down, trying to capture something that feels too big for words. My story is not finished. None of our stories are ever really finished until we take our last breath. There will be more chapters, more challenges, more moments when I have to choose between kindness and bitterness, between grace and grudge. But I know which choice I will make. I have known for a long time, not because it is easy, but because it is right. Not because the world deserves my kindness, but because I deserve to be the kind of person who gives it. My daughter-in-law texted me, "Heat up the leftovers for us." And what I did next left her speechless. But that was just the beginning. The first crack in the wall. The first ray of light. What has happened since then, what continues to happen every day, is so much bigger than one meal or one moment of grace. It is a family being rebuilt. It is cycles being broken. It is 3 generations of women learning to love each other for the first time. It is proof that it is never too late. Not for forgiveness, not for healing, not for hope. And if I can do it, at 63 years old, with failing eyesight and a small apartment and a stubborn belief in the power of a home-cooked meal, then anyone can. Anyone. So here is my invitation to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever hurt you are carrying. Set the table, make the meal, choose grace, even when it is the hardest thing you have ever done. And watch what happens next. You might just leave someone speechless, but more than that, you might just change everything. My name is Eleanor Price, and this has been my story. Thank you for listening.